So you've seen the numbers, right? You've seen what a runaway train that episode has been and continues to be, right? Uh, does it surprise you to see this kind of interest in music from that era?
It really doesn't. I mean, I'm just thrilled, and I think it's a testament to the music. I think it's a testament to what you and your colleagues are doing in bringing these kind of conversations, and this one just replete with the whole sonic element to it. Um, and I got to tell you, the fact that I am still teaching classes, not just to folks of my generation, fellow baby boomers, people in their 60s and 70s, but can still reach audiences in their 20s, non-veteran and veteran alike, I think speaks to that capacity and power and impact of music. So I'm delighted, but I got to say, in a way, I'm not surprised because the music's so good. And then those connections with memory and that era is way powerful.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've had some really heavy at times, but always sort of deep and meaningful conversations, as part of this work that I'm doing. I don't remember having as much fun any other time. I mean, that was a real kick for me to be having that conversation with you, because I think there's something about music from that era, and I think it has to do with what was going on in America at the time, right? It was Vietnam, it was civil rights. There was so much happening in the country that would turn out to be pivotal, and that would turn out to be defining moments, right, for us culturally and politically and otherwise. And I think that environment bred music that was meaningful, music that had something to say. And I feel like, certainly we've had a tumultuous past 20 years or so, but I don't see a lot of that reflected in terms of music that I think will stand the test of time, music that I think has substance, and not just art in the musical sense, but actually something to say that will still be relevant 50 years from now.
I agree. And I think, of course, I'm biased, having grown up then, having sort of cut my teeth and grown in that music vacuum or crucible, as you just described it. And when you look at, like you said, all the tumult, I mean, you only have to go back a few years. And when you think of the convergence of all that was happening around COVID and George Floyd and the presidency and but when you look at what people were playing at I mean, when people were getting released from hospitals, they were playing things like "Here Comes the Sun" or "Ain't No Mountain High." I mean, it's you can't get away from how good this stuff is, and it continues to speak, as you pointed out, to things that are important and that mattered. It anticipated, it reflected, it contained and expressed all that stuff that was happening. And there was a purity of the industry then, as you know, from being a musician yourself. We've always, we've been blessed in America, always great music. But that music was more about, I think, artistry and message and important, just something that of value. Now, I mean, even though there are, I'm sure, artists that still feel this way, it's a commodity. It's something you sell. It's something that you purchase in ways that you're a consumer. Then we were participants in the music. I mean, we were part of what they were saying and singing. I don't know if we're ever going to get that again, frankly, the way the world is and the way the industry's sort of changed. But um, I couldn't agree with you more about how valuable and important and vital that was. And it really, I mean, it's sort of it's almost like the landscape. You can look at for what it's worth, or Fortunate Son, or Galveston, and you not only know where you were, but you know where the country was when that was happening. Okie from Muskogee. We got to get out of this place. As you and I know from that previous conversation, it goes on and on.
I think you just touched on something that is worth exploring a little bit. So, when I think about sort of I hate to use the word zeitgeist, but I mean, where we are today, even if you look at the technology that's used to record and distribute music, it is personal, right? Everything is mastered and engineered for earbuds. Music is no longer a shared experience. It's something that you do by yourself. Even if you're among other people, you've got your earbuds in and you're the only one who can hear what you're listening to. And I think that is related in some way to this phenomenon of social media where people have their own channels, right? A 24/7 sort of cable channel that's just about you and your life and the things that you do, right? Everybody's the star of their own movie. And I think that a lot of today's music is written for that. It's about resonating with you on a personal level, but not necessarily any more broadly than that. Whereas the music of the Vietnam era was we music. And I don't hear a lot of we music anymore.
Yeah. I think you've hit on something too. And I know probably some, I'm sure there are folks, Taylor Swift, Little Nas, Drake, who knows, who might disagree with us. But I think the point is there was a communal element to that. And it was the way we heard it, the way we shared it. Now all music of all time is accessible to you, and you can put that in ways that you said is your concert. That's the Michael Crone Symphony. Um, and in those days, like we've talked about this before, whether you served or whether you stayed, whether you participated or whether you protested, we all listened to the same music. And it did something, I think, to ground us in who we were and where we were in ways that we can't do now. I think I mentioned this to you last time that when we taught our course at University of Wisconsin, we were lucky to have a couple TAs with us, to do the small group sessions and help, orchestrate and choreograph this thing because we had tons of students and lots of excitement. And the class would ask them about their soundtrack. And they basically answered the way you just did. They put on their headsets, they had their MP3 players, and when they were in Iraq and Afghanistan, they listened to their own stuff. And they got, if it was Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, I mean, who knows what it was, but they got jacked up and they listened. The interesting thing was when they said they had some communal moments when, the headsets would be off, the buds would be out, and they'd be maybe sharing something. It was Credence. It was Hendrix. It was Aretha. I mean, there we are. We're back there where you started us in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what were they doing? What were Credence and Hendrix and Aretha doing so differently that they drew a crowd rather than a bunch of individuals?
I think part of what they did, and if just knowing enough about my colleague Craig Werner, who co-wrote "We Got to Get Out of This Place" with me. Craig's got a book about Aretha, Stevie Wonder, and Curtis Mayfield. So he's had conversations with these artists. He did an oral history of Creedence Clearwater Revival, when those books were kind of popular. And, they basically speak directly to this. I mean, you get Clifford and Fogerty both being connected, one in the reserves, one in the Coast Guard. So knowing it was guys like them, that those were the choices. You join up, you're not going to college. You're either, something's going to happen. You're going to get drafted. You might as well enlist. You're going to be part of this. And it's guys like you. It's working class kids. It's guys like you to do this. Aretha, the church, being born in that, understanding. Remember, this was really the first integrated army. They, after World War II, after Truman decided, But in Korea, we were just learning how to do this. This was the first thing. So you got, black and brown and white, just all together in units. And music was a way for them to get that. When Aretha did her cover version of I Say a Little Prayer, she echoed what Burt Bacharach and how this is for the soldiers in Vietnam. This is for them, So I think they listened. I think there was an awareness. They weren't in this bubble of I'm the superstar. Look at Marvin Gaye and his brother Frankie. Frankie Gaye in Vietnam, writing home, not thinking he's writing to his parents, not to Marvin. Marvin's reading his letters. He gives a hell of a lot. He gives two shits about what's happening to Frankie and is there for him when he gets back and he writes what's going on. So I think, being aware and listening and wanting to know and understand, and more of us were in that juggernaut, than we're not. You had to make, I always said this to, I say it to my colleagues and guys, I go, we had to make a decision about Vietnam every day because it was there every day. When it comes for us, what are we going to do? What are we going to do now? And what are we going to do then? And how do we prepare ourselves? Well, we sure as heck had the music to help us.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Now my head is just spinning on this idea of it seemed like then we defined ourselves in large groups by what we had in common. And today we're defining ourselves in ever smaller, more fragmented groups by what we feel makes us unique.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think we're onto something here. I mean, and music is one barometer you can use to assess that, which was what we're talking about. I mean,
but it is the music, right? It's the songs that are written and the subject matter. It's all of that, but it's also, I really think there's a really interesting role here that technology plays, right? That the fact that music is mastered and engineered for earbuds, the fact that listening is something that people do solo now, right? I mean, you talked about this in our first conversation, right? What happened when, people had some way of playing music that others could gather around. That technology became part of the whole musical experience, right? It wasn't just a bunch of hardware. It was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing the same thing now, but it's pushing us farther apart.
And, we were just discussing, like I've said, Vietnam was the first mediated war in terms of we had radio, we had cassettes, we had live bands, we had Bob Hope, we had James Brown and Nancy Sinatra. And like you said, those were more communal kinds of things. We got around somebody's tape deck and we plugged in a speaker and we all listened together. Or somebody would start to strum a guitar in the hooch, and that, as good as that was, and it's never going to happen again because, as you said, now the technology has advanced so much. That's great. You can get music anywhere, anytime, anyway, any song. But you're doing that now. You got the Michael Crone soundtrack and the Doug Bradley playlist. It's not, we got to get out of this place. A soundtrack of the Vietnam War. It won't exist anymore.
Yeah. So, against that backdrop of how different things are now than they were then, are there any, I feel weird saying it because it's the title of our podcast, but are there any echoes of that period that you see in today's music? I mean, did that era of music in any way define all of the music that followed?
Oh man, that's a great question. I'd like to think that it did and it has, but I would probably be hard pressed to give you, concrete evidence of that. I mean, we know about the Clyde Stubblefield, funky drummer beat that Brown had that is on it. It's the base of every song. You know this as a musician. There are certain things of that era that are always going to last. But then knowing from whence they sprang and where they are exactly in terms of today's techno music or rap or R&B or country, it's hard to say. Um, I do think that there's awareness, but I think, as you pointed out, it's a little more self-awareness. You know, I don't have old enough granddaughters yet, but I have friends who do, and we talk about Taylor Swift, and she was just in Phoenix, Arizona, and what it was like to be able to get a ticket to that concert, and what a phenomenon that is. And I think there is some honest, um, personal, powerful music there, but there's so much the echoes, the chamber around that in terms of who she is and girl power. And not that I mean there's anything wrong with that, but it's just it's so much it's a commodity. I mean, that is an industry. That's a brand. That's not some of the other stuff we're talking about. So when I try to think back on, when I think of the seminal songs for me in 70 and 71 when I was there, a couple of the things that predated us, but of course then, Jet Plane and Feel Like I'm Fixing to Die and The Letter and Dock of the Bay. Um, how do those now parlay into today? Um, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the message. But hey, we made it a lot easier, I think, for a lot of folks to be able to put, a guitar around their necks and think they had something important to say.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I guess, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that the closest parallel to that, if there is one, is probably in rap and hip hop. And I'm not speaking authoritatively here because full disclosure, I don't listen to hip hop. I'm a musician and I find hip hop unsatisfying musically. But having said that, I do think that, somebody like Kendrick Lamar, even when he's talking about himself, he's not talking about himself. I do think that guy is making a broader social commentary, and I don't think he's probably the only one. I can't think of anybody in pop music who's doing that. And that's the difference, right? Is you probably have this corner of social analysis and social commentary in rap and hip hop. Whereas 50 years ago, it was everywhere. It was in country music, it was in rock music, it was in folk music, it was it was everywhere. It was in soul music, right?
All kinds. Yep. And I think you're right about rap and hip hop. And if you look at from whence it sprang, we can look at a lot of things that we're talking about in terms of Vietnam. And that was, the launching point. I mean, that's why, you've got Fortunate Son. You're probably not going to have that song that way if you don't have that war and that level of conscription of soldiers. And I think, when you look at, Run DMC and some of the early groups and what came out of that experience and how they put what they were living and how they were living it and who they were into that sound. And even, I mean, country was there and pop was there, and they've sort of held their ground, but it's not defining somebody as to who they are or what's going on. And I think you're right about those trends. And some of that started when there's people that talk about how disco, especially groups like Chic and others, had an influence that kind of sound into people like Earth, Wind, and Fire, and where that ended up landing in terms of today's African American music or soul music or rap or hip hop. And some of that came out of Vietnam, crazily enough, in terms of some of the artists and some of the places vets could go where they could feel kind of safe. It's a crazy part of the story, but getting back.
Say more about that.
Well, there were a couple artists in Vietnam and I'll I'll think of one of them now is
You mean they served there?
that were in Vietnam. They came back and really got into electronic movement, not electronic jazz like Billy Bang did, which is another whole story and his whole story. Um, but I'm drawing a blank right now on the name of the guy and the group. And techno music sort of emerged from these guys, and a lot of it, um, they said, had to do with the guitar player who was a Vietnam vet. Guy didn't talk. When they were out on the road, he carried a weapon. He was, a bit antisocial, for all good reasons, but he channeled that energy and that experience into his music. It's almost like, you know, Larry Lee and Hendrix, and the rest of the band at Woodstock. I think there were five band members. Three of them were Vietnam vets. On stage that day, playing the Star Spangled Banner the way he did. And if that ain't Vietnam, I don't know what is. I mean, there's helicopters on that song. There's machine guns. There's,
Bombs.
everything.
Mhm.
Um, and that is, and so we had a little bit of this in some of the other music too. There, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. I'll think of it eventually. Probably there were so many people we interviewed for that book, but so there are portents, and I think you know, there are little seeds that were planted. But as you pointed out, given the way we listen and access music, the way music is programmed and sold, changes that experience. And the good thing about this, Michael, I mean, I'm sure there are many good things, and there's great creativity, and we maybe between us don't know enough. But when the young people that come into our class, some of whom some of these kids are born after 9/11. I mean, you talk about young. And Vietnam could be the Peloponnesian War, because we don't teach it enough in schools. They don't know nothing about it. They know who the Doors are. They know who the Temptations are. They know who Bob Dylan is. They know the beat. And so then to be able to take a song like, you know, um, Sky Pilot or, The Letter, uh, or Where Have All the Flowers Gone, even Destruction, and connect that to a veteran's experience and memory and maybe healing. It's a powerful way to start. And then you got to give them the context. Well, why is this guy talking about his boots and why does these boots are made for walking, do that for him in those ways? And then you say, well, here you are, your boots are important. You're walking, in terrain like Vietnam, and you begin to explain and give context. So that's one of the good things. If there aren't a whole lot of great takeaways, and I don't mean to be too disparaging of today's music and today's artists, but it's profoundly different. And then it was vital to who we were. I wouldn't have gotten through Vietnam, I don't think, or these last 50 some years if it wasn't for music.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I should probably clarify that, it's not just rap and hip hop that I find musically unsatisfying. It's 95% of today's popular music that I find musically unsatisfying. There's certain elements in music that I really enjoy hearing, like melody, right? I mean, I'm a jazz musician, right? I like harmonies that support the story that the song is telling. I like melodies that are fun and inventive and part of the storytelling process. Rhythm alone isn't enough for me. So I don't listen to a lot of today's pop music because it's so highly productized. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was listening to music with a friend yesterday. He's an audiophile. He's got, I don't know how many thousands of dollars worth of hi-fi equipment in his house. I mean, it's a sight to see. And it's a really interesting listening experience. But he put on Lana Del Rey,
Mm.
who's just huge, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that it had a lot of the elements that I like to listen to. It had harmony, it had melody, it had, it was telling a story. It was deeply personal. It was intimate. Um, there were a lot of things about it that on paper should have made me like it, and yet I was completely unmoved. I found it, totally unremarkable,
Hmm.
because I've heard Sarah Vaughan, heard Gladys Knight,
Yes.
you know, and I've heard Joni Mitchell. So I'm not impressed with Miss Del Rey.
Yeah. No, I even throw Janice in
Yeah, no kidding.
there.
Wow. Yeah. I don't mean to disparage today's music either. It's not for me, right? I'm not the target. And because it is so commercialized and so productized,
Yep.
the target really matters now.
It's all about the target.
So that's another difference between today's music and music back then. Back then, it was created by an artist as a form of self-expression. And today it's created somewhere in the marketing department, um, by essentially the musical equivalent of product managers based on target demographics and social media trends and what's going on in video games, and
Yeah.
it's just it comes from somewhere else, and therefore it lands differently.
Well, and I think the way that what we talked about before landed is that not only did we share this appreciation, and we sound like a couple grumpy old men now, um, but we played some music, and it's like we can talk and talk and talk, but you drop the needle on the Letter Now or Dock of the Bay or Fortunate Son or Galveston, and people are going to go, "Whoa, I'm there. You got me." And frankly, and not just Vietnam vets that'll happen to. Um, and I think that's why I keep going back to that in terms of the nexus of what's important and what can make people get home. Bring them back. Bridge over troubled water. I mean, come on. Um, all of that stuff. You throw Haggard in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know,
amazing. It's funny because we listened to a lot of music yesterday on this very, very expensive hi-fi equipment. But the moment that really got my attention was a real surprise. He put on Link Ray.
Oh, I love Link Ray.
Link Ray Fire and Brimstone. I mean, this stuff was recorded in a chicken shack. Like, this is not Abbey Road Studios we're talking about, right? It was recorded in a chicken shack, and it just sounds unbelievable.
Yeah. I just had that same experience here with Dwayne Eddy. They who was here in this town, and he was with Lee Hazelwood. Speaking of these boots are made for walking, and he and Hazelwood were in a guy. This was a car repair, almost like a junk shop, like a sugar shop. I mean, it was tin, and this is where they got the echo. And you listen to Rebel Rouser. I mean, it's like it just explodes because of where they were. I mean, Les Ford started this all, but Dwayne Eddy in that building with all that tin and cars, and just all that stuff made this sound like just explode. And it's so good. I mean, what's better than that stuff now? I mean, it's like you still hear it and you go, wow, that is amazing.
Yeah, it's so vivid, right? It's got such an atmospheric quality to it.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, and as you're teaching these classes to all these young people, right? All these people in their early 20s, people who were born after 9/11, um, what are you learning from them?
Well, that's a great question. I think what I'm learning, it's it's kind of interesting. There's a couple things. One is I feel bad that they didn't have a chance to grow up and sort of they talk about the adolescence and adultolescence, and we these kids, I think, didn't have a chance to grow up in the ways that we did. I'm not saying that was perfect, but just in terms of being able to become who you are and how you live and what's important without having somebody label you or shame you or do some. It just seems like they don't have enough of a chance to become who they want to be. And then now the pressure, that's another thing I learned from them is they're in pressure cookers. I'm not saying I didn't apply myself in college and I was first generation. My brother and I, my dad got his GED in the Army in World War II. We were working class, lower middle class folks when there was a middle class.
Mm.
And but I didn't feel what these kids do. I mean, they are just so intent. I mean, kids will have arguments with me about getting an A. I tell them grades don't matter, and they tell me they do. And and we're losing kids going in. The great thing about our course, it was an interdisciplinary course. It was taught in a program called Integrated Liberal Studies. So you could have people who were journalism majors or music majors or art majors. Or just that wanted to take a class and get some requirements that were in the sciences, psychology, English. Don't have that anymore. I mean, these kids are really big on STEM. They're big on, because they're going to have student debt and student loan. They want to make money. So one thing I learned from them is that it's not as much fun. I mean, there's still fun being in school, but there's a lot of pressure. And I think also that takeaway of as much as integrated as is all the music's accessible, there isn't a context for it. I mean, if they like Creedence and they listen to it, they have no sense of what that meant then. Run Through the Jungle, Bad Moon Rising, Fortunate Son, even Proud Mary, Down on the Corner. What is that? Or, Jefferson Airplane. Why, what is, and so not having context, even though it's great to like the music, and I'm glad they do, but losing the context, I think, takes some of the significance and power of the music away. And I try to learn from them what's the significance of Lana Del Rey or Tamar Hendrick, Lamar Kendrick, and Frank Ocean. They teach me a little bit of that. So that's the great thing about, if you don't think you're, the sage on the stage, you're part of the learning experience. You can learn a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think they have different expectations from their music?
Um, I think they have expectations might be the word. I think they have. I almost feel like they're all programmers. I mean, like there's the sad playlist, and there's the happy playlist, and there's the moody playlist, and there's the boyfriend and girlfriend playlist, and there's the movie playlist. It's just, it just seems like I feel like there's categories, and so maybe expectations in that way. I'm going to get jacked up for this, or I'm going to get down for that.
So music is purely functional. It really is like a soundtrack. Like it's what mood do I want to set before I take this next set of actions?
I mean, I'm almost feeling that way. I mean, when I do Spotify, I've got, certain artists and certain, genres. But now you go, I mean, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you upbeat? Are you down? It's like, give me a break, I mean, music's music. I want the music that I want, and I'll figure out what it means.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Like the idea that, I mean, you'd put on a record, you'd put on an LP, you might go through 8 or 9 different moods, 8 or 9 different sort of emotional color palettes in the course of listening to that record. Now you decide what mood you're in and you pick the music to reflect that.
Yeah, that's the way a lot of it works. I mean, at least that's part of what I gained from, listening to them and talking to them. But, again, Michael, back to the thing, music is, I mean, for a lot of folks, it's still essential. It's still this adhesive tape, this DNA connection that we have, as different as it is from the way we're explaining the differences, and articulating that. And again, somebody might disagree with us, but it's still music that's at the center. And thank goodness, people still get that part. Maybe they don't get all the rest of the stuff we're talking about because it's different, but it's still music.
Yeah. Well, I think just to sort of close things out, I'm gonna read a list. I'm just gonna read some titles from among our top 10 episodes. Our podcast is called Echoes of the Vietnam War, right? And we all who work on this podcast, we all work for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. So it's very much about the Vietnam War and people who fought it and the people who were otherwise affected by it. And in our top 10 list of episodes, these are the most popular episodes we've produced. We have titles like The Tet Offensive, The Battle of the Ia Drang Valley, Remembering Khe Sanh, Hamburger Hill. And number one over all of those is music of the Vietnam era.
Yeah. Well, amen. I mean,
and not by a small margin, by a large margin.
Because it was meaningful for all of us. And I think you can't, for me, and of course, again, I mean, I wrote a couple of books about this. You cannot separate the music from the time and from that time. And as we discussed last time, especially for those of us in the rear like me, who was writing stories about what the guys were doing, was going out in the field and doing interviews, that we had access. I mean, they gave us creature comforts. They knew music was essential to us, keep our morale up because we're writing to keep their morale up. It's sort of this chain of connections. We had tape decks and cassettes and, bands in the EM Club and guys playing guitars in the Hooch and AFEN 24/7. You could get it on helicopters. You could get it, on radio bands. I get it on the bunker line, so, yeah, I think it is so integrated and integral to that experience. We took the music with us. We had it while it was there. We brought it home. It's helped not just to connect us, and maybe sometimes it's painful, but sometimes it's healing. And it's the best music ever. And again, over that course of 11 years of that engagement that we had, 64 to 75, if you will. I know that last soldiers left in 73, but a lot of us are still there in 74 and 75. It was the music. That was the time.